Give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in. Let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me out forever, but I ask you please, don't fence me in.
Hello and welcome to Nature Kids Radio, the podcast that is completely dedicated to bringing childhood back outside. I'm your host, Kenny Ballantyne. Nature Kids Radio is a production of the Nature Kids Institute. And if you haven't already, please visit naturekidsinstitute.org for a free online course on connecting kids with nature, as well as videos, blogs, and other resources. We have an awesome guest with us today, joining us all the way from beautiful Scotland. Claire Warden is an award-winning and internationally recognized lecturer and educational consultant. And she is the author of some of the best books I have ever come across when it comes to connecting children with the natural world, including Potential of a Puddle, Nature Kindergartens and Forest Schools, and my family's favorite, A Fascination with Fire. Claire is also the founder of Mind Stretchers, which is described as a dynamic company made up of an enthusiastic and dedicated group of people who feel that all children are entitled to learn in a multisensory and naturally creative environment. Hello, Claire, and welcome to Nature Kids Radio.
Hi there, Kenny. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Very well indeed.
Claire, you once authored a book entitled The Right to Be Me. I really love that title and that concept, and I wanted to start off today by asking you just what kind of experiences do children have a fundamental right to?
I think the book actually that you're talking about was written around the UN Convention on Rights of the Child. That's where it came from, really. But one of the things that I'm feeling more and more is that they've actually got a right to nature. And that's not written into that, the UN Convention on Rights of the Child, apart from under that larger umbrella, which is play. And so when I started to write that book, it was really designed to get people to talk about, what are those things that children have a human right to? And then within those different elements, what is it that nature does for these young children? And so we know that it has a massive effect in terms of calm. It has a massive effect in terms of intellectual stimulation, of physical growth. So, there's huge amounts of research out there about all of that. And so I think children do have a right to go out into nature. They almost have a right to fall over and get a bruised knee. They have a right, almost to what we call in Scotland having a stucky, which is when you've got a broken arm, that big plaster you put on, that's called a stucky. And you almost have a right to that. It's a rite of passage. It's those moments. It's okay to go outside and be cold and be on a beach and, get sand in your sandwiches. You've got a right to roll down a hill and wonder if you're ever going to stop. All of these things that to me are so much about childhood are disappearing, and I think they have a right to a really authentic and magical childhood, which is filled with challenge and opportunity. So I would say that's my big passion about not protecting childhood, because I don't think you should overly protect it, but just giving children enough time to be and to have a childhood, to be a child, really.
Let's take a moment to look back at your childhood. What was it like compared with what we are seeing in the world now?
I thought, my childhood was really wide and very free-ranging and very full of risk, if you like. I spent long blocks of my time kind of on my own. It's not like I was a Billy No Mates, but I spent long blocks of time playing down in an area of the garden where I made myself a den. And I had a little petal perfume shop, and I ground down all of my bits of petal and bottled it up and tried to sell it to the neighbors, and in those sort of social interactions with the community, you develop a sense of yourself within a much bigger picture. And I think what I see now is an over-processing of childhood. I see an over-organization of it. I see adults who are worried when children say they're bored, whereas, in my childhood, my mum would say things like, well, boredom's a state of mind. It's the stimulation for creativity. So she never stepped in too quickly and gave me the answer. It was about allowing me to work it out. And that really developed in me a real sense of affirmation that I could entertain myself. And I think about myself as an adult now, and although I love company, I don't need the company. I don't need to be with other people to feel happy and content within myself. And I think that probably came from those moments where I did just play quite happily on my own. So what's missing? Well, I think the amount of time children in nature is what's missing. I think I packed a little rucksack and put my bread and cheese in it and went over the hills, and I was gone for most of the day. That long distance playing away from adults has disappeared. The amount of time spent outside has got much more defined. So people are kind of saying things like, well, we went to the park and it was an hour, or we went outside but it was only maybe for an hour or half an hour. And so the time constraint has come right in. And then the resources that people are playing with are not the homemade stuff that I had, So it was a bit like Blue Peter. It was, this is what you've got. You've got the cardboard box and play with it and see what you can do with it. And there was no precise answer. Whereas the resources we're buying for children now have a very set way of being used. And it means there's this sense of right and wrong. There's a do it the adult way, or really it won't be the right way or the best way. And so I think the other, I suppose the fourth one of that would be the adult role in it, where I think the distance, and I mentioned this briefly, the distance we have between children and adults has got so tight now. I think that, it's almost voyeuristic that children are always being looked at. They're always being studied. They're always being watched. And they don't have that sense of aloneness, of being trusted almost to be further away from an adult. So, yeah, that's kind of what I think is happening now. Although I would say that I feel, and I've been doing this work for now 30 years or so, in the last 10 years, I would say, especially the last 5, that there's a raft of people out there now around the globe who really are trying to just redress or to remind people about the importance of childhood, a risky and adventurous childhood, but also the place of nature within that.
And where do you feel is the greatest opportunity for impact when it comes to bringing beneficial risk and exploration back into childhood? Is it the school, the family, the community?
I think in all of those areas. I think if we were to sit there and say it's one person's responsibility, you'd kind of you'd find that it wasn't complete enough. And I think for me, I work in the domain of family, and so it's about supporting those families through a project we do in living classrooms called Family Forest. And for some of those parents coming through, they themselves haven't had the memory of being in nature and being free and exploring risk. And so it's almost a case of taking those families with a wee bit of support around them and saying, this actually is the stuff you've been seeking. This is the stuff you're looking for. It's magical. So let's celebrate and have a joint voice as a community now and really get these exciting opportunities happening. And then I work in education, where I now look at the delivery of curriculum. And in some parts of the world, it's as an advocate to work with governments to get outdoor learning written into that curriculum. But in many parts of the world who do or do not have a set curriculum, it's about taking nature from this little compartment that it's in, which is kind of where education sees the Mini Beast project. And it says, right now we're all going to learn about ladybugs or ladybirds. And so they do a little project, and it's, a couple of weeks, and you look at ladybirds, and that's very nice. And it's important that we know about nature. And then there's the, I'm just going to take it, and I'm going to take my classroom activity or my opportunity, my play opportunity, and I'm going to just lift it up and take it from inside, and I'm going to put it outside. So, I see people who take, colouring in sheets, for example, and they lift them up and they put them outside and they put them on a table, and then they go, here we are, we're now learning in nature. And my work is the third element of that, which is learning with nature. So that means we look at these links in learning that happen from inside to the outside space, but also into the beyond, which is the wildness of nature, which is the forest or the beach or the mountain or the mud, and wherever, desert, wherever you happen to live in the world. And so what you can do is, in education, we can track and explore these links in learning. And that means that we're really trying to push forward the understanding of nature pedagogy, which is the way you teach with nature. And then the other part of my head has to be as a lobbyist, as an advocate for children. So it's talking to government, it's talking to people who don't really want to listen, and really being sure that we're knocking on the right doors, because I think sometimes people sit in their own little safe silos, and it's not going to be an easy journey, because some of the big decision makers don't really want to hear the argument for nature. They just want to be left alone, because it's much easier to do what you've always done. So yeah, I think all of those aspects, and I believe that each one of them has the capacity to evoke change, really.
With regards to your lobbying and working with governments, you have seen some pretty remarkable results and progress in Scotland. Am I right?
Yes, I mean, I would say I think we are doing brilliantly. I have to be very chuffed about Scotland, because people think we're England. We're not England, and we're not Wales. We are different. We have a devolved government for education, and I think what happened was that there were lots of different groups all coming together around the same sort of time. All of us saying, from like RSPB or the Forestry Commission, or from the government itself, we were all kind of having conversations about the same thing. And then that meant that we've ended up with a curriculum for excellence where pretty much every outcome for learning has an inside and an outside option for delivery, which is huge in itself. And then the biggest thing, I think, is that the culture of the land, the culture of this space now, is one that we embrace and celebrate outdoor learning and outdoor play. So yeah, I'm really chuffed to be part of that process, or even a tiny part of that process, really, where you feel that we've made a better place for children. And now, people come from all over the world to see some of the work we're doing here, which is great. It's good.
I have seen some of the pictures of your forest schools and nature kindergartens, and they are absolutely gorgeous. Some of them look like something out of a fairy tale. These awesome old cottage-like buildings with moss-covered roofs, kids playing in green spaces, running with sticks and building fires. It is truly remarkable and beautiful. But I can't help but imagine that many people, after seeing these photos, would feel overwhelmed and come to the conclusion that, well, that may work in the lush forests of Scotland, but we can never pull that off at our school. And I am sure that they would bring up all sorts of barriers that would prevent them from attaining what you have attained. So what are the barriers you hear about the most, and how do you help people overcome those barriers?
I think the biggest barrier to it is about human connection and understanding to what it is that's going on in that space. Because, when we first started the Nature Kindergarten, we were pushing licensing, really. That's part of our job as advocates. And we used to have conversations about, is the only thing these children are doing running around amok in the woods, and we would be like, well, no, actually, there's real intentionality about the work we do. And we're very mindful, we're very fully present when we're with these children. And so that's when we started, as I say, delving into this thing called nature pedagogy, because we realized that it's easier when you're in a big forest or on top of a mountain or on a beach, because nature's doing 95% of the work for you. But actually, the nature pedagogy runs whether you're in a little urban site and all you've got is a plant pot with a bit of grass in it, then that happens there too. And the connection to children might not be as encompassing as it would be in a massively wild space or a more rural space, but it's still happening. And we've seen amazing things where we've worked, for example, in the centre of Liverpool or Hartlepool, these big cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, very urban sites. And we've really just helped them to transform their landscapes. But the most important thing about those processes is that it's not just the landscape change. It's also about a change of thinking and a change of valuing nature, I suppose, as a method of teaching and learning. Yeah. So the other barriers, I would say risk aversion, absolute fear that children are going to bump their knees. And one of the things I find quite interesting about that is that we talk a lot about risk assessment. And here we do benefit risk assessment. So it's always the benefits first. And then it's the risks, and then you're saying is it a payoff? Is it the right trade-off here, that the benefit outweighs the risk? And if it's not, then you wouldn't do it. But 95% of the time, it's a good balance, and it's a much more positive thing than negative. But people focus in those risk assessments on the physical harm. So it'll be a broken arm, a broken leg. It'll be things like that. Whereas actually, I would say we need to have conversations about intellectual risk. There are children currently in the world who are in the most monumentally boring classrooms, that it's a wonder they survive. We have children who are in intellectual situations where the curriculum and the opportunities being offered to them are so inappropriate that it makes me wonder really how they make a connection to their own learning. And the third type of risk is emotional risk. And it's the one that's hardest to measure, but it's the one that actually causes the greatest damage long term. And it's the one that really, if you had to look at the fiscal purse, there'll be a greater investment in sorting out emotional harm in children if we don't actually stop this tide of aversion to risk, if you like. So my argument would be balance off that physical harm to intellectual harm and emotional harm. And then you begin to see really, especially in those emotional and intellectual domains, how so much positivity comes out of connection to nature.
Wow. How about the barrier of cost? Do people ever say nature is expensive? We can't do that. We don't have a budget. So how do you answer? The cost one's an interesting one because we actually now at the Nature Kindergarten, we don't buy paper very much. We have a bit of it inside, but we draw on leaves. So we have these big leaves called docken leaves. So your actual consumer cost goes down. You don't need to buy a new plastic toy. And although we have beautiful wooden materials inside, they're built to last. They don't break like a little plastic knob on a train or something. They're very robust and very strong. So yes, they cost more at the beginning, I suppose, in terms of natural materials, but they will last for longer. And the second thing is that nature's free. Nature, you've only got to buy that packet of seeds. And even if all you did was go outside and buy a box of grass seed and just sprinkled it across a pavement or sprinkled it across your backyard, actually, that grass itself has enough play potential. And it is so full of possibilities to young children. And it may be, I don't know, costs what up here would be about £5. It's a tiny amount of money. The third point, I suppose, is about cost, is that it was interesting. I was talking to a landscape designer and we were talking about the playscapes that we were creating. And I was saying, we need to use native materials here because for me, those are the plants that are designed to be in that climate and that place. They're the ones that are going to be cheapest because they're most commonly there. And so he was showing me a catalogue where you could now buy basaltic granite or basaltic. You could buy basaltic columns from areas of the world which are now being denuded in their natural environment because landscape designers are being asked to bring this basaltic column into somebody's backyard. And so I'm like, this is ridiculous. Now this is, we're raping nature now. Now we're going out and grabbing all the nature we can without being aware of sustainability and respect for nature, and bring it into our own backyards as almost like a token of victory over nature. So my work is, don't go out and buy that basaltic column. Look at the most commonly existing materials you have in your environment, and then use those. And, I don't think there's a massive issue around a child picking up a fir cone and bringing it home as a memory of that walk. If you went into the forest and you denuded the forest of every fir cone, then that's not sustainable and it's not the right thing to do. So nature actually is free, and the wind costs nothing and the sunshine comes for free. So people worry too much, I think, about big landscape projects, but we do more community builds, and that's about people in your local community coming together with all the things they have to offer. At least here in the United States, in our park systems, there is a very big emphasis on leave no trace principles, which entails a very hands-off nature experience. It is really easy to make the case for leave no trace, especially in a national park setting or other protected lands. But many, and I think you would agree with this, would argue that this comes at a cost.
It does. Yeah, I think I agree entirely. When we're doing things like the forest school programs that we run, or we are leave no trace. Absolutely right. So if we're lighting fires, we're very respectful of that, and we do a lot of stuff about looking at site management in the work that we're in. So we have, however, for our own fault, I suppose, as being British, we've gone around the world and basically stolen a load of stuff in colonial times, brought it back, and it's now invasive species in our world. So for us, where we're working with Parks Department or we're working with our own forest, we're intentionally taking out now these invasive species, like for us it would be sycamore, and planting oak. Now, when we take out the sycamore, that then becomes the resource that we then use within our educational programs. If a child wants to pick a sycamore leaf, then they can, because it's invasive, there's too much of it, and we're going to actually be taking it out of that environment anyway. If a child went up and went to pick an oak, we would be having that conversation saying, this oak tree will take much, much longer than this one to grow. And this one is very precious to us because we know we've grown it from an acorn and it's actually been here for 100 years and it's only this big or whatever. And so children actually are incredibly clever at working out which things have a real value that we need to nurture and care for, and which things are invasive and we need to control. And I think we need to trust that children can do that. The ones who aren't particularly clever is the adults, where if an adult is taking a child to a park and they pick the rare orchids, there's a consequence to that, and that is the orchid will become extinct. So I think for me, it's more about understanding of balance in nature. Although I can see why the Parks Department and many organisations have gone towards the leave no trace, because it's an easier model. Right. So I don't pick anything. If you don't know, don't pick anything. And that's true for us. If we're out in the forest and the mushrooms are up, and we're not sure which ones we can eat, then we wouldn't touch those either. So a lot of it is about, I suppose, what would I call it? Embedded knowledge of land. So, I think peoples who've been on the land for generations know it. They know it. And we've lost some of that embedded knowledge. We've lost that deeper connection to the land that we're on. And my job, certainly I feel at the moment, is to reawaken those voices and to give them a conduit out into a wider forum. I've just literally come back from a World Forum actually in the Caribbean, which sounds very dramatic. But one of the conversations and the stuff I was sharing there was a project we'd done in WA, in Western Australia. And it was working with Rawa Community School, a beautiful, beautiful little school, but it's out in the northern desert, about 600 kilometres from the nearest establishment, a lovely Aboriginal community. And what we were talking about there was two ways of knowing. And the two ways of knowing are the Aboriginal ways of knowing, the cultural ways of knowing on the land, and what they call the white fellas way of knowing. So two ways of knowing, always two ways of knowing. And that's really stuck with me, because I think we've got so entrenched in our own beliefs about the fact that we're so egocentric, we think our way is the only way. This duality of knowledge, this knowledge that sits with the people who've been before, and the knowledge of the more sort of more commercial, the more modern world, I suppose, need to go hand in hand. And I think there's been an imbalance in those two things. And I'm trying to recreate more of a balance in society, really.
You advocate for a connection with the elements. Now, three things come to mind that many parents go to great lengths to keep kids away from, namely dirt, water, and fire. So why do kids need a connection to these elements? Why are they important? Especially the fire part.
Okay. I think when I wrote those books and I started to think about how do we make this conversation about nature a little bit more specific. So, as a parent, if someone came up to me and said, right, nature's good, go on, out you go. If you don't have, if you don't speak that language, if you don't have that understanding of what that means, then it can be quite a challenge. So what I started to do was to break it down and say, okay, let's look at the elements, because, people have done that for many generations. And so we took fire, earth, air, and water and said, okay, they exist around the world in more or less forms. And so we can use that as the global conversation. So then we started to say, all right, let's take fire. And people go, oh, my God, fire. But actually, what we've found from the work we've been doing is that children need to be trusted. They're actually incredibly aware of the physical and obvious cues that fire gives us, right? So if you do with a 3-year-old and you're sitting there and you've got a fire burning and they can see the flame and, they understand the heat of that fire, that's much safer, actually, in my world than a radiator, which has got hot pipes that come to it, because there's no physical cue to that young child that that's a hot thing, none whatsoever. And the same is true of cookers. So in the old days, you would have a fire that you cooked on. The cue is it's fire, it's hot. What we do now is put in an electric stove, or in Scotland, we have these big wood burning stoves and solid fuel stoves. There's no outside cue that surface is hot. So the first thing, is that you're doing these benefit risk assessments. They're written around the work that we do. And so we talk to children about having a fire bubble or having a fire circle so that when we're around the open fire, we don't run, we walk. There's always an adult there. When we want to sit and watch, we can do. And we have seats about 1.5 meters away from the fire, so that, your understanding of fall zones, your understanding how to keep those children safe, but not as safe as possible, but as safe as necessary. And that's the difference, because you could be completely controlling around fire. And then the second thing about fire is that it teaches you things. We sit around the fire, and many Indigenous communities have used fire for celebration. They've used fire for connection. So some of the best conversations I've ever had with young children was sitting around a fire. And you're just sitting there and everyone's looking at the fire and we're watching the fire, and then the conversation naturally starts. So there's something there about community building. There's something there about connection to something that is primeval, but it has a connection to your soul. It's almost something that's beyond the words. And then the other element for us is that we use it. So fire gives us charcoal. So we make charcoal, we make char cloth, we cook on it. It keeps us warm in the cold winters up here in Scotland. So it has a purpose and a function that therefore means that we can do all sorts of learning for us as educationalists wrapped around fire. So, you have to go and collect your sticks, but you're going to have to get a little stick that's very thin to be your tinder. And then you're going to have to get a stick that's about the size of your finger, and then some about the size of your wrist. And we have to saw it all up. And so all of that process is done with children. So should there be dirt in children's childhood? Absolutely, yes. We have now something called International Mud Day, and it's a global connection. It's started off really in the World Forum Foundation, and now we've got people coming into the Nature Action Collaborative saying, well, actually, we're in Nepal. So it was a conversation between Bishnu in Nepal and Gillian in Australia saying, how do we get that social relationship happening around mud? And so now we've got people, as I say, in 83 countries who are saying we are now going to be part of International Mud Day because we adore it. It happens at the end of June.
Like any movement, especially conservation and environmental movements, it is really easy to learn all about what is going on and then to feel incredibly depressed. We're becoming more and more aware of the consequences of an indoor childhood, and yet nothing seems to be changing or slowing down. The screen time keeps going up, the products keep coming at our kids, urbanization keeps sprawling its way across the land. So in light of all of that, I wanted to ask you how you stay positive and what gives you hope and motivation to do the work that you do.
I think I derive hope from meeting people, and I think when I started this, I say about 20 odd years ago, I felt that I was really having to open new doors, and now I think there are people who are welcoming me through doors. So now we've got people who are really saying enough, 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 enough. So there's a voice, and there's a global voice developing to say enough is enough. Now, that alone means that there's something to counterbalance the increase of that screen time. If you don't have anything to counterbalance screen time, then it'll go even faster. And it means that some of the work we're doing right now, which is to not say, right, get rid of technology, because it won't. We can't ever get rid of it. Now it's in. Is to say, okay, well, what can we now do to speak the language of those teenagers, to speak the language of those children who are so embedded on their iPads or their technology, to help them understand it's about balance, to help them understand that actually you can use that iPhone. So we have iPads at the Nature Kindergarten, but they go outside and they'll do, a time-lapse photography on the growth of the fern in the forest, and then they'll make their own little video, and then they will put it up on YouTube. So in some respects, we can use technology to help children see and explore the wonders of nature. I do, however, think there should be times without screens, and I think that's the bit I'm more focused on, is to say, I use laptops. Here we are, we're talking on Skype, so I'm not technology adverse. I'm just saying it's all right that I'm working with a screen with you, and we're sharing this right now. But I also have times where I put my laptop away and I put my phone off and I go outside and walk the hills with the dogs. So it's to me, it's always about balance. I think in terms of the increase in toys, you're absolutely right. The consumer society is huge. But I am seeing in the catalogues a shift, certainly in the UK. When we started, really, Mind Stretchers was the only one saying, you know, we want ethically sourced products, we want fair trade, we want, you know, natural. Now, in that trade environment, you're seeing that the catalogues are selling natural materials for outdoor learning. They're selling more waterproofs for going outside in the rain. They're selling buckets. They're selling mud kitchen materials. So actually in the UK, you can see very clearly there's been a massive shift round. I think the challenge is in the States is that you're maybe further on that continuum of commercialization than us. But, you know, there's the Children of Nature Network. Fantastic. You know, and I'm on the international advisory board for that. And then you've got the World Forum, and it's got the Nature Action Collaborative, and I'm the international group for that. So you've got these big global conversations happening now, and I think there's a real strength to that. And so if we can, it's just about making sure that net of connectivity keeps going, and that gives me the energy to keep on going. I think I'm designed to be a fighter, if you like. As a kid, I was maybe the one who was just a bit tenacious and a bit spirited, and so I quite like a challenge, which is probably good. And everybody gets disheartened, but you have to just sit there and look in the eyes of a child and say, are you worth fighting for? And the answer's always got to be yes for me. So yeah, keeps me going.
I know you are currently involved in some very exciting work concerning the development of a nature pedagogy. Now, could you describe what that work entails and what it means?
The new project I've been involved in is, you know, I've already touched on it, is this understanding about the balance between research and practice in education. And I think what we've started to do is to say, here are some bright ideas for going out, and that's fine, but they won't actually be embedded. And what happens is that the ideas will run out. So what we've created is this thing, this definition of nature pedagogy, this way that we work with children. And so now for the first time ever, we've got the opportunity to be able to do continual professional development as an educationalist, or anybody who wants to be involved in it. But now, you know, in education, you have the basic requirements to work in early childhood, which is Cert 3. It changes its name in different countries, but it's basically a first level qualification. And then you have diploma. And then you have the bachelor's degrees and Bachelor of Arts, often in early education. Then you have master's and PhD. Been working with Federation University now in Australia, and what we've managed to do together is to create a nature pedagogy right the way across that banner. So you can be a teacher who's going to graduate with a specialism in nature pedagogy. You could be somebody with a PhD in nature pedagogy. You could be somebody who's working in a daycare environment, and you can have a certificate in nature pedagogy. And what I'm saying to universities is saying, right, okay, here we are, we've written the course. Now what we need to do is find other organizations, other universities who want to deliver this kind of training so that we have this international, this global network of nature pedagogues who have a real celebration and a real belief that we can learn with nature more effectively than we can with any other teaching strategy. And so, you know, I've probably got, 10 universities already who are saying, absolutely right. If you write it, and we've written it, if you write it, we'll co-deliver that. So can you imagine then a world where you can be in any country in the world and you can go to a university and get your initial teaching qualification or your educational qualification, and it's going to always have nature right at the very center of it. That if I achieve that, then I can die a happy woman, really. Yeah. So it'll take me some time, but we're well on the road. So I'm really excited about that. And ironically, the one vehicle that's allowed it to happen is online. So, you know, one of the things, the challenges that we have is to say, here we are, you know, it's 80% online. And I'm saying, yeah, but there has to be the 20% practical where, you know, you really have to go and you have to play in the mud and you have to light a fire and you have to go and work in the forest or the beach or wherever you happen to be, because there has to be that connectivity to land. And so when we were discussing it, I was saying this is ironic, you know, because I'm now talking about nature pedagogy through the vehicle of a computer. So then we said, right, well, maybe what we should do at the beginning is have this little sentence that just says, you know, unplug your computer and take it outside and sit under a tree and do your nature pedagogy qualification while sitting outside in nature. So it is a bit of an interesting anathema, really, for us to get around. But I think the long-term benefits of it will be huge.
Claire, I believe that if you want to create a new reality, that you must first imagine it. And I was wondering if you could help us imagine a future where childhood is once again an outdoor affair. What is the future that you are striving for?
My dream of the reality is that families feel that nature is where they want to be, and that we have families who really hold on to that belief structure, and that number of families increases. And then wrapped around that, I really like to believe that there are community spaces that we can go to where corners and abandoned corner plots have been revitalized to celebrate nature and not sprayed with weed killer. I would really like wrapped around that there to be this international understanding as an educational frame of nature pedagogy, and I'm well on the way to getting that at the moment. So wrapping around that is this educational shift, in the paradigm shift, if you like, in the way that we teach with children, teach and learn with children. And we celebrate outside and really embed it in our educational establishments. And then wrapped around that, I would really like there to be set policies and strategies at a governmental, a strategic level that say, no, actually, strategically, governments believe in it. And we've got a few of those on board, but there needs to be more.
Claire, it's a beautiful vision. Keep up your amazing work, and I am sure we will see it realized someday soon. And thank you for joining us today on Nature Kids Radio.
Okay, have a good day, Kenny.
That's it for today. Next week, we will be joined by Susie Worth and Susan Freshman from the Arbor Day Foundation. Would you like to visit a theme park that is completely dedicated to trees and nature? How about stand atop the world's tallest treehouse? And what in the world is an outdoor classroom? Well, those are just a few of the things we'll be discussing with them next week on Nature Kids Radio. Until then, thank you for listening. I'm Kenny Ballantyne, and I will see you outside.
Oh, give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence